This is Gregory Conte. I'm here with Augustus 𝔸𝕦𝕬𝕦𝕦, and we're going to talk about the James Fields trial. So, Augustus, I've spent the last 3 days, well, I spent the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday down in Charlottesville, Virginia, that accursed city, and I was going to the Fields trial. It was jury selection basically all day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Unfortunately, I didn't get to see a lot of that on the first 2 days, or on Monday and Tuesday, because I didn't go. But I watched a little bit of it on Wednesday. I think they had something like it was 360 jurors or potential jurors to go through in selection, and then they finally Thursday morning winnowed it down to 16, and then they began opening arguments for prosecution and for defense Thursday. And the big thing that I've been noticing with the trial, well, let me set the scene a little bit more. So the trial is being held in the Charlottesville City Circuit Court, which means that the jurors are all drawn from the city of Charlottesville. It also means that in the courtroom, there's maybe at any given time 10 or a dozen reporters from various outlets, a lot of local news, some sort of internet third-rate journalists like BuzzFeed. And then between like 20 and 40 Antifa-ish people and various just kind of bohemian layabouts as well. And then a few lawyers and other types. So it's an interesting scene, to say the least. What I'm seeing mainly is that the defense, they're playing it very soft. I don't see any way that they're not taking an aggressive line at all. Every time a witness comes up to talk or to give testimony, the defense attorney, he's very deferential, and he doesn't really press them on a lot of things. He doesn't try to he didn't bring up, for instance, that one of the prosecution's main witnesses, Marcus Martin, the black who is in the famous photo of the Fields' car crashing into the crowd. He's the one who's flying through the air. Marcus Martin testified, and it was never even mentioned that he has a felony conviction or multiple felony convictions from his life.
Right. So, some of the things I don't know how Virginia trial process works. I don't know their rules. I'm only licensed in states outside of Virginia, like Florida, Massachusetts, Illinois, New York. So I'm not familiar with the Commonwealth of Virginia, but I do know that in most states, if you have a felony conviction, that's something that impeaches your testimony. So maybe it was older than 10 years, or there's some rule I don't know about in Virginia, but it seems to me that the first thing the defense counsel would do when questioning Marcus Martin is bring up those felony convictions to show that this is not a person of good character. This is someone whose testimony should not be believed. Or at the very least, you should question it and not just swallow it wholesale.
Yeah. Is there some let's kind of impeach the defense a little bit more here in their opening arguments, and I noted this in the story I wrote for Russia Insider. A couple of the arguments in the opening statement, I'm not a lawyer, but they struck me as being either just bad or being actually counterproductive to the defense's own case. So, for instance, the defense argued that Fields did not flee the scene; he left the scene. Now, is there some, which to me suggests, first of all, is a jury going to see a difference between those two things? And second of all, you're almost undermining your own case, because if he left the scene rather than fleeing the scene, doesn't that mean that he wasn't afraid for his life after all the people smashed the back of his window with bats and sticks?
Right. It seems like a semantic argument to say that he was not committing a crime because he just left and wasn't fleeing the crime. I think what they're saying is he wasn't fleeing a criminal action of his own. He was just leaving because he didn't know better. That's what it sounds like. But
so
like you said, yeah, it does undermine the defense's case, because if you're being attacked by a mob of violent communists, the logical thing to do would be to flee.
Right.
So I don't know what the defense narrative is, but that would definitely undermine that.
they're trying. So Fields is charged with first degree murder. I think it's 8 counts of aggravated malicious wounding, and then running. There's like a couple other ones thrown in. Running a stop sign, I think is one of them. But then he's also charged with fleeing the scene of a crime. So I'm sure in Virginia law, or I'm sure generally in the laws of various states, you're allowed to flee a crime, or you're allowed to flee if someone's trying to kill you, right?
Right. Yeah. And there are instances where you're allowed to commit actual crimes if you are under duress. So if someone puts a gun to your head and says, sign this bad check, you're not, well, I'd say under the gun, but no pun intended, but you're not, going to be arrested for filing a bad check because you have the defense of duress. Someone forced you to do this. In the case of James Fields, yeah, if you're fleeing the scene of an accident because you're being chased by a mob of violent communist terrorists, then yeah, of course you have 100% a defense against that.
Yeah, and all right, so another blunder. The defense argued that Fields only brought a change of clothes. So they're trying to say they're trying to set up that he didn't bring any weapons. So he didn't intend, when he drove from his home in Ohio that morning, arrived in Charlottesville at 03 or 03:30, spent, I don't know, there's a blank there until about 7:30 where he went to Waffle House. And then after that, he met up with some other people and then eventually ended up downtown, was at the rally, was in the shield wall. He got his shield from somebody else, clearly. But the defense is trying to set up that he didn't bring any weapons. He didn't bring anything other than a change of clothes, which, okay, I see that maybe as being an argument. But then the prosecution's argument, the main thrust of their case is that Fields committed first-degree murder because he premeditated the car attack.
Right.
So, when one is going on a sort of suicide mission, Muslim style, typically you don't do things like bring a nail clipper and a toothbrush.
Right. Or if you're, going to blow up the building, you're not bringing a sidearm or a box cutter. Yeah, I mean, it's not natural to the crime. It has nothing to do with that. I guess what they're trying to defeat is this idea that James Fields was a violent neo-Nazi terrorist who showed up to this rally to do harm. And then, because the rally was shut down, he wasn't able to go killing commies all over the place. So he got in his car and did it. I guess that's, the narrative they're trying to defeat. But yeah, it seems an odd argument to make, a really tangential one. And more importantly, from what we discussed before, it sounds like they never even brought up the fact that he was chased with a rifle by a member of Redneck Revolt.
Oh, you're talking about the defense?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they haven't brought it up, but they are calling Dixon, Dwayne Dixon, the Antifa, so-called professor of Asian studies at UNC.
Right, but the purpose of opening arguments is to tell the jury what they are going to hear and to tell them this is going to be the case that we are laying out for you. These are the witnesses we're going to call, and this is what they're going to testify to. So if they have that guy on the defense witness list, they are supposed to bring that up in opening arguments and say, this guy is going to tell you that he chased James Fields with a rifle, and that's why James Fields was in this state of mind. And then he was attacked. You're going to hear testimony that he was attacked by a mob of violent communists after being chased with a rifle by one of the same group. And then he backed out and hit these people. So that explains his state of mind, and that's what we're going to show in this trial. And it sounds like, from what you had told me, they didn't even broach this subject at all.
Yeah, so I was there all Thursday morning. I skipped the afternoon, and then I was there all day Friday. So maybe they did bring it up in the afternoon, but the afternoon was all prosecution. Thursday afternoon was all prosecution witnesses. So unless
they've
brought
already
it up,
had opening arguments. Yeah, at that
point, they didn't bring it up in the opening argument for sure.
Right, and that's the point to bring it up, because now the prosecution witnesses go. Defense can cross-examine them. Sounds like they're doing making a show of that, not even really doing their job, and then they put on defense witnesses after saying, they've got to make a pro forma motion that will never be accepted, but they have to make this motion saying the prosecution didn't prove their case, so we should throw this out. And then after that motion is denied, then they put forward defense witnesses. But by that time, half the jury has already made up their mind, at least half the jury. So it's your prerogative in opening arguments to make the point, these are the witnesses we are going to call because they're going to tell you that this happened and that's why this happened. And so that's why we're going to show you that James Fields is not guilty. And they either missed that opportunity or just completely threw it out the window.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the prosecution's case. So the prosecution started right from the get-go with saying her first line out of from the main prosecutor, Denise Lunsford's defense,
Right.
Nina Antony. First line was Heather Heyer was like beautiful and intelligent, and she always treated others as she wanted to be treated. It was ridiculous. It had nothing to do with the case. And then she went on throughout her opening statement trying to paint this picture of Fields as being this like cold and calculating Nazi. She kept mentioning how he idled his car and it was like he was sitting there on the street just watching and just thinking. And before he slammed on the accelerator and went 200 miles an hour, into a crowd of people with a truck, like
a jet launcher. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, trial advocacy 101, the job of the prosecution is to create a narrative and to explain to this jury what your narrative is, because that is the prosecution's theory, that James Fields is a terrorist, a cold, calculating, neo-Nazi who is out for blood, and all these people were innocent counter-demonstrators, and they were just there to hold hands, and James Fields is a monster. It's the defense's job to provide a completely different narrative, like the true narrative, about how this is nonsense. They're not
doing that. They're just saying,
right.
They're saying, actually the John Hill, who's the other defense attorney, opened the defense's opening statement with, "This is not about the facts. This is not a whodunit case." And it's like, okay, I don't think any of us contest that James Fields was driving the car. I mean, there is some speculation that it was all a massive false flag, but without getting into that, without going down that rabbit hole,
right?
The car, okay, fine, but yet still there is a lot of dispute about the facts. There's dispute about how fast was he going, when did he start accelerating, was his car hit before he started accelerating, what other threats or threatening behavior was going on around him that might have caused him to panic. Including, of course, Dixon waving a rifle around. But also, there was, it was brought up and Alt-Right Truth has been mentioning this on Twitter. It was brought up in the opening or a previous hearing that Fields, when he surrendered to the police, had urine all over his shirt. Now, when one pisses oneself out of fear, it doesn't generally end up on your shirt.
Yeah, you'd think urine travels downward. That's a strange set of facts that I hadn't heard.
Yeah, so I mean, either he got just a piss bomb thrown on him earlier in the day, or perhaps it was thrown on him in the course of his drive. Maybe he had his window open or something. But I mean, if it had happened to him earlier in the day, surely would have changed his shirt. I mean, he did bring a change of clothes after all.
Right. Well, it seems like this is one of those cases where, like I had the American Front case years ago, and I've been talking about the Ram case recently, and I point out the fact that, the defense attorney's job in a situation like this is to throw their client under the bus. That is what is expected of you.
Uh-huh.
On one hand, you're expected to provide a zealous defense of your client. You're expected to, give everyone the opportunity for a fair trial. This is America after all. But on the other hand, you're really expected to play the game. You can't go around saying James Fields is actually innocent.
Yeah.
That, God forbid, you would be kicked out of every bar association and club in this country, and then you'd end up, like me. So you have to kind of put forward this half effort where you're saying he's entitled to a defense. He has these constitutional rights. We have to go through these motions and play the game. But at the same time, we're not going to defend this violent neo-Nazi who clearly wanted to murder our innocent communist friends. because if you do that, you become the pariah. So I don't know, what the defense counsel is thinking, and as an attorney, I can only say so many things about them. I can't impugn their character, but I can say they are certainly, especially living in Charlottesville, certainly under an extraordinary amount of pressure to put up some kind of defense, but never say he's actually innocent. And that's why the defense attorney would come out saying, this is not about a dispute of facts. This is not a whodunit case. We know
Hmm.
all the facts. This is just about perspective, because that's his job. He has to sell him out, at least to some degree.
Wow. So much for the Mr. Smith goes to Washington, or Gregory
Yeah.
Peck defends a random black in Mississippi, or
Yeah, or
view
Atticus
of the
Finch,
American judiciary system.
Right. Yeah, no, that's totally a bogus view. I mean, I especially like my first. I mean, I was red pilled in law school, but that's a different story. But it was the American Front case almost immediately after law school that really woke me up to that fact. When, I saw countless Central Florida lawyers just chucking these people under the bus as fast as they could because no one wanted to be associated with it. I was actually interviewing to do civil work, just contracts cases and business law with a different firm than I was at, doing criminal defense. And I was told, we'd love to hire you. You're welcome here. Like, let's do this. You can start Monday, but you have to give up the American Front case before you come here.
Uh-huh.
And so I
Yeah,
never did it. I couldn't let it go.
it strikes me as it's just amazing. The left, whenever they get involved in something, uh, they usually have either lawyers that are willing to work on contingency or even pro bono for them, and even radical communists. And not only that, but the strategy that they always take is to throw as much shit at the other side as possible. They ask in discovery for the absolute most ridiculous things.
Oh yeah.
I was looking through some of the records on the Antifa who were involved in the MSU incident, and a lot of them, their lawyers asked for helicopter footage from the police. I mean, of course,
Sounds about right.
it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, we're not going to give it to you, but like they asked for it, just to like presumably just to waste people's time.
Yeah, I mean that's I won't say a legitimate trial tactic, but it's certainly a conventional one when you're trying to cause the other side so
Yeah,
much trouble that they want to drop it.
and yet I keep seeing this in every defense of our people. Our own lawyers just take, for the most part, take this like placid, non-confrontational line. Just, oh, if we just like play this safe, we won't piss off the court and we won't piss off the other side. And like,
Yeah,
you don't want to be aggressive because then they'll come down on you extra hard. It's like we
yeah,
have
and
nothing to
that's
lose. What are we
technically
doing?
exactly 'cause it's technically true. I mean, you are going to piss off the judge, and they are going to come down on you. But at this point in American history, we don't need zealous defenders playing by the system's rules. We need partisan guerrilla fighters. At this point, we are past any gloves on mentality.
Quite agreed. So, one of the things I've been noticing about the trial, talking about like the system being, very unfair. Uh, so there's been some evidence that's been presented in the court that isn't available to the public. So, for instance,
Sure.
Friday, the prosecution showed video from the police helicopter, presumably the one that crashed later, but it was video footage showing from above the Fields incident. Now, I don't know exactly what angle, because in the courtroom, they're not showing the footage to the observers. Only the jury, the judge, and the lawyers, and the defendant can see the TV screen because they have it set with the back to, or the back of the TV is facing the audience. So, I do wonder, like, I think on that footage, if there is footage from above or footage from maybe like a security camera placed high up, you could actually see for like how far Fields was accelerating. You could see, were people like really were a lot of people behind him? Were people approaching his car before he accelerated? All that stuff, but
Right.
you just can't see it. Is that normal in a trial like this?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Well, at least it's fair to say that I don't think it's nefarious. I
Hmm.
don't think their intent is nefarious. That is, some courtrooms, they're just set up like that. There are courtrooms in Orlando and Osceola County, where the jury can see this massive projector screen, and so can everyone else in the courtroom because
Right.
it's on the opposite wall. It's just the way the courtroom is set up, and
Yeah, I've
you know,
seen that too.
yeah, and it sounds like the one in Charlottesville, the court, I haven't been in that courtroom, but it sounds like it was just not constructed to be a showroom for the audience. One of the things people don't understand about the Nuremberg trial, the International Military Tribunal, like the main one, is that they actually constructed the courthouse there so that it would be propagandized. So they constructed the entire thing so that they could get the best angles for the cameras, and they could play these propaganda reels so
Hmm.
that the whole audience and all the cameras in the room could see it. So it was specifically designed for that. And I think a lot of the newer courtrooms are designed in the same way, but there are still courtrooms where it's just not germane to be reconstructing the whole place
Right.
just so the
And
people in the pews can see it.
well, and I could see a reason, a reason for the judge not wanting, the audience to be, you know, just reacting to
That's
everything,
true
and
too.
it
Yeah,
sort of
because if the
biases
jury
the
sees
jury.
these, right, if the jury sees the audience, they could be biased and think, "Oh, I should be shocked by this too.
But here's the
Oh, I
funny,
should also be angry."
yeah, but here's the funny thing. So like having a bunch of Antifa and just leftist people in the audience, they're playing video of the incident itself. They're playing video from earlier in the day where people are. They played one video where Fields is in a crowd and shouting "fuck you, faggots," and they like play this like it's chanted 20 or 30 times, and like they're playing the video for the jury, and the audio's on, so like the everybody in the audience in the courtroom can hear what's being said, but they can't see anything. And in a couple of these videos, like especially when there's like the screaming and like people like wounded on the ground, the people in the audience are like crying and stuff. So it really doesn't achieve that effect. Um, I what strikes me as bizarre and unfair is that this police camera footage has not been released. I mean, if this is such an important incident, and this is a primary piece of evidence, it's not like you're giving away some kind of like tactical secret by releasing the footage.
Well, or maybe they are. I mean, it could be that they knew that the jury was going to be influenced by anything coming out in the media. I mean, I always think of, the Unabomber case or the Charles Manson case where it's a highly publicized case and the law enforcement doesn't want certain information getting out because, if somebody confesses to that, chances are they're confessing to it just because they read it in the news. That happens every day in this country. Somebody reads something in the news, calls the police, and says, "I did this, and here are the details." So law enforcement will specifically and deliberately keep details from the public so that they can confirm when someone confesses that they know details that are not in the public view. So that could be what's going on.
Hmm.
Or it knowing Charlottesville and the way it operates, as we all know now, it could be that they just don't want the truth getting out. I mean, I hate to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but we've seen how they operate at this point.
Yeah. What are some examples of Charlottesville's previous sort of contortions of the law?
How much time do you have?
Let's
Man,
just yeah, let's go through the laundry list just real quick.
well, I think the most important thing to point out for this audience or any audience is the Tim Heffy report. So, after the rallies, the Charlottesville City Council hired a former U.S. prosecutor, a U.S. attorney, to do an independent review of what happened at these rallies and how things could have been different. And Mr. Heffy pointed out actually this was all your fault. All
Yeah.
of you in the city council of Charlottesville, all of you in the Charlottesville Police Department, you screwed this up. If you had done your jobs or not tried to screw with the right wing, none of this ever would have happened. You people set this up deliberately. So
Yeah,
that
and one
220
could
page report,
it's
everyone needs to read.
yeah. I just read it a couple weeks ago, and it was just damning. It was just
Yeah.
page after page of just outrageous circumstances and facts.
Yeah, and you notice after that, I mean, that was what, like last November,
Yeah,
late,
December, I
it was
think.
about a year ago now. And after that, all news stories about Charlottesville ended just overnight, just over with. And
Right.
everything from that point was just recycled garbage from before.
Right, and we all kind of thought, or I mean, at least I thought, and many people I know thought, well, gee, we didn't expect the Heafy report to be anything other than a hack job, and then it came out and was actually
Yeah,
reasonable
yeah, good
and
for him.
basically spot on. Yeah, he was an Obama appointee too, for I think for
Yeah,
the same federal district that Charlottesville's in.
yeah, you know what? Everybody talks about Obama appointees and all this stuff, but like you said, Heffy was an Obama appointee, and what I've been pointing out recently, the guy behind all these Rise Above movement cases in Los Angeles and Charlottesville, U.S. Attorney Tim Cullen, who also, by the way, is the one who pressed the 30 hate crimes charges against James Fields, he's a
Uh-huh.
Trump appointee.
Yeah.
So,
The
which
conservatives
president
always
appoints
have
them?
to they have to counter signal, and the only people that, yeah, ironically would be try to be reasonable would be people whose liberal establishment credentials are unimpeachable.
Yeah, kind of like Nixon opening China, because no one could question that he was anti-communist. So in this, backwards day and age, someone who's an establishment liberal could conceivably come out and say this is pretty screwed up. But, I'm still waiting to see that happen.
Yeah.
But one
What?
thing you had mentioned earlier about Marcus Martin that I forgot to point out. Um, I do a show, or did until we were banned from every platform, the Daily Planet, where I go through the news. And one of the big stories earlier this year was Marcus Martin. He got married to this girl, love of his life, massive wedding, all
Oh, I thought you were
purple
about to
and white.
say. I thought you were about to say a massive girl.
Well, I don't really comment on people's marital choices, but massive propaganda piece is what I'm getting at. And Heather Heyer's mother was there, releasing a dove. It was just, I mean, amazing. The links they went to at the New York Times to promote this, and it was all about the backstory of Marcus. And this is how we know he has felony convictions, because he spent time in prison, because the New York Times talked really openly about it. And that's why I
Yeah.
think it was pretty recent, because this whole conversion into a good person story is in the last couple years. I mean, Marcus Martin just got out of prison by my recollection, and none of this, not the New York Times promoting this propaganda, not his prison conviction, his prison sentence, not who paid for this wedding, who is propagandizing all this.
Yeah.
None of this
Well,
came up in the defense
this is
cross-examination,
also, well, let's talk about the cross-examination and the examination. By
or
the
the lack thereof.
Well, yeah, right. Marcus Martin, during his testimony, broke down crying. This
I'm sure he did.
big,
He's probably
swole
got
black guy,
acting crisis.
ex-felon,
Yeah, he's probably got
was
acting
weeping like a little
teaching for these
boy.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it was sincere. These same people who are promoting this in the New York Times and, paying for his wedding and all these other things that are propagandizing this man and everything he is. I mean, one of the things he was in the most famous picture about Charlottesville, won a Nobel Prize, for God's sake, in
Or
2017.
a Pulitzer.
You know what? It might have been a Pulitzer. I remember it
Yeah,
being a Nobel, but
I don't. Yeah, they
you
don't
might
give.
be right. That
It
would
must have
make
been a
more sense.
Pulitzer. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but none of that is even on the table for the defense. Where did this guy come from? Why is he being propagandized like this? Who taught him how to cry on the stand? I mean, it smells to high heaven.
Yeah. Whew. So as I'm going through, like, taking notes, like I have just pages of notes from like a day and a half of being at the trial. It's it's hard to make sense of all of the facts and all of the circumstances. There's simply so much information. One could become an expert in Charlottesville, and I hate to think that I'm gonna have to spend the next months or years or the rest of my life, God forbid, like reliving Charlottesville. It's just
Well, if it makes you feel better, I'm sure that either the prosecution or the defense or both are going to come out with books about it. Because,
Yeah.
a case this famous, O.J. Simpson's lawyers, Charles Manson's prosecutor, all these people, they make a fortune on the book that comes after the trial that they massacred.
Yeah, after Charlottesville for, the next, year plus after Charlottesville, we all kind of wanted to like go on and do other things, but the left just dragged us back into Charlottesville. Like, oh, let's just relive and litigate and keep going over this again and again and again, and it's getting tedious. I mean, there's so much. Like, anyway, let's just go into some of these other facts about Charlottesville that you didn't know, and you didn't find out in all the war stories you're swapping with your buddies at the awesome after party. Uh, so Fields. So there's a lot of I don't think a lot of people knew or anybody knew what had happened to Fields between the time that uh, a unlawful assembly was declared, which I think it happened was 11:45 or so. Between then and when the car accident happened at 1:40. So this came out in the defense's opening statement. They talked about Fields left Lee Park. He went to the west, so he didn't go the same direction as a lot of the Ram guys went, and he didn't go toward that garage where that whole the DeAndre Harris incident occurred. Fields left the safer direction with a large group of people who went west and then walked up McIntyre Road back to McIntyre Park. He then went back to get his car, which was parked at a McDonald's, and I'm pretty sure, like they've been saying, it was a McDonald's near McIntyre Park. It's not really that close. It's like south of McIntyre Park and west of Lee Park, I think is the one they're referring to. There's another McDonald's like farther away. But anyway, he went to this McDonald's. It's across the street from a Shell station, or was then at that time a Shell station. And he goes to get his car. He met up with three people, just people he didn't know, but who were at the rally too, and offered to give them rides. So they all piled in. He drove over to Jefferson Street, which is right by Justice Park, which is where all the Redneck Revolt Antifa were hanging out around that time. He dropped off a couple of people there, and then he drove to the garage, I forget, Market Street garage, the one where the DeAndre Harris thing happened. Right. He drove there, dropped off the last guy, and then left. So that's what he did in the, I guess, little over 2 hours or almost 3 hours that between the end of the rally and when when it happened. I mean, I suppose one could reproach Fields for driving back into town for any reason.
Yeah.
It was very perhaps naive to think that the situation was under control.
Yeah, I don't know what he was thinking. That's to be frank. Yeah, maybe he thought that because the rally had been dispersed hours before, that the streets were cleared. Maybe he was going somewhere that he knows that was logical, and we just don't know where he was going. Maybe his hotel was down there. I don't know. But having been down there and knowing, from the TV and from everything else that these riots were going on, I think it's clear no one should have been there, but he might not have known that. I mean, if he's going to all these places, going to McDonald's, going to, wherever else, and he hadn't been to a hotel yet and hadn't seen the news, he might just didn't know that the riots were going on.
I mean, the big piece of information in all this, the big thing that nobody is talking about, or at least other than us, other than the alt-right, or I don't know if you consider yourself alt-right, the dissident right, whatever, is that the dispersion order came. The alt-right left, went to McIntyre Park, a lot of us, and then dispersed from there, and we're gone. The left was parading around in the streets and just having a riot, and
counter demonstration.
The counter demonstrators. And this is, I mean, this has been also some people have commented on this, but I was noticing this too in testimony. The prosecution's witnesses keep saying that the crowd was feeling joyful. They were feeling victorious. They keep emphasizing how happy everybody was. And that was also in the prosecution's opening statement that they were feeling joyful. So it's like, they must have coached. I mean, it just
Oh,
seems like
yeah.
they're coaching the witnesses. I mean,
Oh, to think that they're not, nailing everything down before going to trial will be naive. You're not supposed to coach your witnesses and tell them what to say, but in a case this important, to think that the prosecution is not telling them, look, your fellow witnesses are saying everyone was joyous. Is that true? Okay, good. So you're going to need to say the same thing. We just want to, get out your side of the story and let the jury know how joyous an occasion it was for everyone. I mean, there's certainly a way to manipulate your witnesses to say what you want them to say. And if that's going to create the overall narrative, then so much the better.
yeah, they keep several of the. I mean, a lot of the witnesses, a lot of their testimony is ad libbed, but there are parts of it that just sound scripted and sound like kind of set piece,
Right.
and they like the joyful thing. The first witness, the first guy to go before Marcus Martin, is a guy named Webster. He's a ostensibly a third party. He was like hanging out at his apartment with his girlfriend all day, and then once the rally was dispersed, he came out because they were going to go get a beer or something, and he was on the street right next to basically where Fields was idling the car, and he testified. He's a pretty smart, put together guy, but he kept saying that the entire street behind Fields was a ghost town.
Mm-hmm.
He said it two or three times. It was just I don't know.
Yeah, like almost like the prosecution wanted to emphasize the fact that there was no one there. And James Fields was obviously targeting this massive crowd of peaceful counter demonstrators because he was so angry at their
Right.
joy. Kind of like, terrorists, they hate our freedom. They
Yeah,
want to
and
blow us up because they hate our
did
freedom.
and what isn't being mentioned is so okay. Even if there wasn't anybody behind him, like that could be seen, let's remember Redneck Revolt was hanging out. Is that like probably 4 blocks up the street um over by Justice Park. Fields had just passed that area um,
Right.
15 minutes before or something like that. So if he'd backed up, I mean, first of all, people are chasing
He would
him.
have been running into
He would have been
a
running
group
into
with rifles who were
rifles
chasing
who had
him earlier.
already,
Yeah,
yeah, already like drawn down on him.
exactly. And I know there are, you know, other people who had those same guns drawn on them. I don't really want to, talk about what the
Yeah,
circumstances were because it would
yeah,
blow their scene, but there are other people who
there's
had those guns drawn on them. So it's not like this is James Field's story alone. They were
no,
doing this
I
to
know,
everyone.
yeah, and yeah. Uh, let's play devil's advocate for a second. Is it possible that the prosecution is right and that James Fields did just get into this situation? He saw them, he saw the leftist mob parading around, being happy, and he's like, you know what, fuck these people, and like in like a 5 second, just rush of rage, slammed on the accelerator, and then fairly quickly regretted it and stopped. But that would be enough to constitute first degree murder.
Right. So if we're being honest, then yes, that is absolutely possible. We don't know, not being counsel on the case and not having seen all the evidence, we don't know for a fact what was going through Field's mind. So it's fair to say it's possible that the prosecution is correct. And if that is true, and Fields was just sitting there idling, even if he thought about it for 5 seconds and said, you know what, fuck these people, I'm going in,
Yeah.
that would be premeditated. He doesn't have to, have thought about it back at home in Ohio before he even drove into town. I mean, it could have been right there at that stoplight saying, I'm going to kill these people and stomping on the accelerator. That's enough for premeditated murder. So if that's the case, then that's the case. But I think with all the other circumstances we know, that's just a total fabrication and fantasy.
Well, it's just it's not likely, and even if it is true, we certainly wouldn't be able to discern that based on the evidence that's been public. And
No.
And the real question is this trial, I mean, anything other than a joke proceeding?
Right. I mean, the only person who could testify to what was going through his mind would be James Fields. Everything else is circumstantial. And yeah, as far as the fairness of this trial, I mean, it's laughable because they filed a motion for change of venue, like every other case that I've
Right.
heard of in Charlottesville. Uh, and I think you had heard comments to the same effect of, it's amazing they didn't change the venue because no one in Charlottesville is unaffected by this,
It's
and no
funny,
one
yeah.
could be a fair juror.
Actually, a couple of the lawyers were talking in just in the courtroom in one of the breaks, and I don't that I assume they're lawyers. Sorry, I don't know they're lawyers. They're people wearing business suits who seem to know the prosecutor, and are just there to observe or whatever. But they were just kind of saying like, yeah, they were surprised that the motion hadn't been granted.
Yeah, because it's clear you can't get a fair trial. And it's, like the Charles Manson case. I hate to keep going back to that, but it's just one of the most famous criminal defense cases where it was obvious he couldn't get a fair trial in a place like Los Angeles, especially after President Nixon had said this guy is guilty. But they kept it there anyway because screw him. He's Charles Manson. Same thing with James Fields. It's like, yeah, well, clearly he can't get a fair trial, but this is too important to let it go anywhere else because there's a chance he could actually walk. So to fix that problem, they changed it from the usual pool of like 40 to 60 jurors to 300 plus jurors that they could, filter through and try to find somebody who would say could be a fair juror. The problem with that is the entire town is full of communists. So, your political background isn't on the papers that they give you.
Yeah.
To interview the jurors during voir dire. So all these communists are going to go in there and say, I think I heard about this. I'm not really an expert, but yeah, I could be a fair and impartial juror. And meanwhile, they're wearing Antifa badges.
Yeah, actually, the judge put out an order saying you can't wear anything like that into the courtroom. I mean, not that it really helps. I mean, I think if
the blue hair probably gives it
the
away.
blue hair I think counts as a badge of political sentiment. One of the other things that the prosecution has been doing with the witnesses is they've been going on and on. In some cases for 5 or 10 minutes per witness talking about their injuries. Is that normal?
I wouldn't say it's normal. If I were the defense in a case like that, what I would have done is file a motion in limine to exclude that, or at least to limit them from, going on and on about it.
Like, shouldn't that be, if this were a civil suit for damages based on negligence, then yeah, I could see talking about like what your damages, what happened to you. Or if we'd already concluded that he was guilty, then yeah, okay, then we look at how badly were people injured. Does he deserve a stronger sentence?
No, as far as discussing the injuries, that is perfectly legitimate. The question is, how much do you get to discuss it? If you're going on for half an hour about a broken arm, that is clearly prejudicial to the defendant. It's what you would object to is relevance because, you've already proved, all right, you got this injury from this accident. Let's move on. Because if you're going any more over that, it's just you're prejudicing the defendant by making it some gory nonsense and blowing it completely out of proportion.
One of the, I think this was Friday, Gene Peterson, who is your typical fat, pink-haired person. I mean, I think she got some pretty bad injuries. I mean, granted, but she went on for 10 minutes about like surgeries and wounds and everything. She even at one point lifted up her shirt to show like her side and like the scar from it to the jury.
I'd objected to that. Yeah.
Yeah, but nothing from the defense. Just like, oh yeah, we're just gonna sit here and take it because we love it.
Yeah, I mean that sounds about accurate. Like what I said earlier, their job is not to show that he's innocent. Their job is to show that this monster has constitutional rights like everyone else, and we're going to put up a show to prove that America's still a fair place where you can get a fair trial. They're not actually going to do the work of objecting when all these clearly prejudicial things come to the stand.
Yeah. Yeah. like we could get lost in the details of this and just go on and on about how unfair it is. But let's maybe take a step back and what if you were the defense attorney, how would you go about handling Fields' defense? What would be your strategy to I mean, not only let's just say how first of all, question one, how would you give Fields the best representation you could? And then question two, how would you, if you were like our guy, our attorney, and more than just getting Fields the fair trial that he deserves, how would you sculpt this to be advantageous to the dissident right more broadly?
Right. So, I mean, the first thing I'd do is build a time machine because we're already at trial. It's too late now. Like it's, the way this is going to unfold is the way the defense, set the dominoes before trial. So my theory on defense work is if it gets to trial, something has gone wrong. Somebody didn't do their job. And in a case like James Fields, you don't really have a choice. It's not like the prosecution's going to offer him a deal. It's just too important for them to let go. You're going to have to go to trial on something like this. But you do have the opportunity to depose all the prosecution's witnesses. And one thing that right-wing lawyers and that criminal defense lawyers refuse to do in 99% of cases is fight the propaganda war, because they don't want the prosecution knowing what their defense theory is. So, you get a case like James Fields, you want to stay absolutely silent because you don't want the prosecution knowing what you're going to say, because then they can counter that in their rebuttal arguments, or they can completely just come in opening arguments and, say defense is going to say this, but this is why that's ridiculous. So a lot of defense attorneys, they're reticent to say anything to the media until trial. And I think in a case like James Fields, that's a huge mistake because this is a propaganda war as much as anything else. So the first thing I think defense should have done is start going on the offensive instead of being defense. Like Patton would say, the best defense is a good offense. And they should have been in the media saying, this was a communist riot. James Fields was chased with a rifle. James Fields is innocent. But again, for these people, they can't say things like that because it would jeopardize their careers. So, and that's what I would have done. But, finding another attorney who would put themselves on the line like that, we're in dark times. I don't think there are many.
All right. How do you think this case, or do you think this case will affect other cases that have come out of the Charlottesville affair? Thinking in particular about Sines versus Kessler, the major civil suit being waged by Boas, Schiller, Flexner, and Kaplan, Hecker, and Fink.
Right. So directly, no, because this is a criminal trial and that's a civil trial. So it's not like it's going to set precedent. But indirectly, 100%. And that's the entire point of it, is to send a message. The James Fields case, cases, federal and state, Sines v. Kessler, the Rise Above movement cases, all of these, the point of them is to send that message to the right wing. You are not allowed to have rallies because you will be attacked. And when you are attacked, you will be charged criminally if you dare to defend yourselves. So that's what they're trying to get across. And if James Fields loses, that's going to be set in stone. Same with the Rise Above movement cases. If those guys lose, it means we are not allowed to defend ourselves. And if Sines v. Kessler, if we lose that one, it means you are not allowed to hold rallies even if you have a permit to hold that rally.
Yeah. I mean, the basic facts of Charlottesville is the alt-right had a permit. The left, including these, clergy who were LARPing as a third party, but were clearly in bed with the violent communists, attempted to block our entrance to our legally permitted rally. The police did not clear a route or offer us an alternative route or control the situation such that our people could get in without being harassed and assaulted. I mean, it is not your right, it is not free speech to stand in somebody else's way. Or to block an entire street to stand in people's way. That's not fucking free speech.
No, that's
and
the last
that's
I
not
checked,
civil
that is
disobedience.
terrorism. No, it's civil obstruction, civil disobedience at best. but that it's definitely not covered under free speech. Heckler's veto would be a generous way of looking at it.
All right, so Augustus, what are we to do?
That's a pretty big question,
I've just
Greg, but
a lot of people have just been kind of thrown out, snorting black pills. We
yeah,
can't do anything because we can't win in the courts. We can't do anything because we don't control the media. We can't do anything
right.
because we can't have free speech online. What do we do?
Well, this might sound like some shameless self-promotion and plugging here, but I mean, there are some things being worked on. There are, since I went on sabbatical, we had talked about this off air. I went on sabbatical and came back a couple months ago, reinstated my license and, opened the new law firm and all that. And it seemed like everybody had just walked away. And I've been trying to get my bearings this whole time.
You mean everybody walked away? You mean our lawyers?
Our attorneys, yeah, and the people who seem to be on the scene doing the legal stuff before. And, in this time, I've found several attorneys who wanted to work on projects, who wanted to start this, that, or the other. So there are several things underway. A couple things I'm not really at liberty to talk about, but I mean, one is the legal defense fund that we started to help with the RAM cases. So all of these cases in federal court, whether it's James Fields or the Rise Above movement or whoever's next on the chopping block, they are all assigned either the public defender, the federal public defender, or they are assigned CJA panel attorneys, which are private attorneys who the court refers these cases out and then they're paid by the government. None of them get to choose their own counsel just because federal cases cost so much money. So what we've done is we've set up this defense fund so that whoever it is in the future, they can get legal counsel of their own choosing. But really, the problem comes down to money. Even with something like the defense fund, it's difficult to crowdfund something like that because Silicon Valley has shut everything down. So I think one of the ways going forward, and this is what we've done with the defense fund, is go full 1980 style, where you get a PO box and you ask people to send money orders, and you just directly deposit those money orders into a bank account. That's how you get around PayPal, Stripe, and Patreon, and everybody else shutting it down.
And side note, but those programs are all garbage anyway. Even if you're not being deplatformed, they just like PayPal just always is a problem.
Yeah. I mean, they will shut you down, not even
guys.
for your political views, but just because they find suspicious activity.
Yeah, they think you're a pod cheat engaged in some kind of scam, and it's like, no, I'm not, and you wouldn't have this problem if this were just, if we didn't have a problem with scammers.
Yeah. Well, I think the real problem we've got in the right wing is people have, they've bought into the matrix. Really, they cannot disconnect themselves from the system. So when you get used to, I'm going to pay this guy $5 a month because it's, I appreciate the work he's doing, or I'm going to buy this guy's t-shirt and I'm going to pay with a credit card through Teespring or whatever. People have gotten so used to that, they've gotten weak and they cannot think outside of that system to where they say, I'm going to walk down to the grocery store and get a money order and mail it in. And if we can get past that mental hurdle, I think the fundraising issue might be solved at least to some degree. And then after fundraising is solved, we do have the legal problems where there are only a handful of us out there who are, willing to even take cases this controversial and say, not only are these people being set up by the government, but they are genuinely innocent and they're good people. When you say that, you're automatically blacklisted as a right-winger.
Yeah.
So I mean, there are things to do, but it's a long march. It's not like this idea we had in 2016, 2017, where we're going to build a social media movement. Like I hope everybody's been disabused of that.
Yeah. Is there so that's the financing angle, but what about the PR angle? How do we get our message out? Well, no, not our message so much as just the truth about what is going on with any of these cases, and that it's effectively a government private sector / communist conspiracy.
Yeah, well, as far as getting on Tucker Carlson, I think we can count that as a dead end. And I think, any idea or notion that we have where we're just going to plug into this system without some kind of radical guerrilla propaganda, we got to just throw that out. We've got to, I always make the reference to Malcolm X, where he's saying, we got to get these white people out of our neighborhoods, get these Jews out of our businesses. We've got to run our own businesses. We got to police our own neighborhoods. And I think we're at that point where we keep depending on law enforcement to protect us, and we keep depending on Facebook and Twitter to defend our freedom of speech. Whereas at this point, we need to be starting our own platforms and completely, like Gab, for instance.
Right.
We all depended on that as the alternative, and then 2 weeks ago, they boot Patrick Little, of all people, like one of the most anti-violence people I've ever met. So we keep depending on the system. We keep getting screwed. And I think we just got to change that mindset to say we're on our own.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well, Augustus, it's been a good discussion. Any final thoughts?
I think those will suffice as final thoughts. Just try to change. We've all got to change our perspective on how much this system can be depended on, to protect our own rights and interests. And we really have to be grassroots, genuinely grassroots, and build things from the ground up, starting with our own communities. I mean, a lot of these reasons that we have these problems is that there's no sense of actual community. I mean, you would be astounded at how difficult it was for me to get information on the families and the attorneys of the Rise Above movement cases, just because everybody's so anonymous and disconnected that nobody knows each other's families or friends or anybody else. And so when you are that disconnected, it's easy for the federal, state, and local governments to just railroad you because they know you have no real community. And so I think that's the first thing we've got to work on.
I couldn't agree more. Well, Augustus, thanks for having the discussion.
100%, man. Thank you very much for having me, Greg.